Can I start by congratulating the Honourable Lady, Member for Wallasey, for securing this debate, and also to publicly thank her, as I have done before, for coming out when she did in 1997. It was a very powerful moment for lesbians of my generation to see a Member of Parliament come out so publicly and so strongly, and I'll never really forget it. It was also really good to hear her mention the abseiling lesbians. I remember watching that this time 35 years ago when I was studying for my finals, seeing it on the 6 o'clock news, just a couple of years after I first came out, and it was a really great moment of lesbian visibility. I also want to thank the Honourable Member for Rhondda for his speech, which I found very moving, particularly the part at the beginning. And I think it's a great reminder to us that much of our focus as human rights activists should be to support LGBT people in countries where they are still put to death, which still happens, and we've seen it happen in the Middle East, and where they don't have basic civil rights. And also very much endorse his plea for the Christian churches to take a more tolerant approach towards same-sex love. Madam Deputy Speaker, LGBT History Month should be a time of celebration, but many lesbians don't feel like celebrating. And I would like to explain why, using the words of my Edinburgh South West constituent, Sally Wainwright, who is, like me, a lesbian. And no, she's not the Sally Wainwright that writes Happy Valley, she's a different Sally Wainwright. Sally is a left-wing activist and an author, and in recent years she spent a considerable amount of time volunteering to support refugees on the Greek island of Lesbos. And last month, The Times published a column written by Sally about her fear that lesbians, women who love women, are being forced back into the closet. And I want to read out some of what she said, because lesbians who feel like her don't have much of a voice in our current public discourse around LGBT issues, and I want to give them a voice in this Parliament. So this is what Sally wrote. Sally says, I choose to spend much of my free time in the company of lesbians and other women. This is essential for my personal happiness and well-being. I find women-only gatherings a world apart from mixed ones, gaining support as well as friendship. The atmosphere, our shared experiences and understanding, and much more are unique, not only in the privacy of our own homes, but also in our social and cultural activities, even walking groups that are open to all lesbian women. In 1988, the Thatcher government introduced Section 28, prohibiting local authorities from promoting homosexuality. And in response, Sally says, she and a friend set up the Deck Chairs Collective, which organised annual lesbian gatherings. The point was to assert our right to exist and to ensure lesbians were not afraid to be out in the aftermath of that appalling homophobic legislation. Sally says, I was unprepared for the fear lesbians experienced. One woman rang to say to me that she and her partner were teachers but hid their relationship from everyone for fear of the consequences of being discovered. She was too frightened even to tell me her first name or the town where she lived, but phoned just for the opportunity to speak to another lesbian. Sally goes on to say that with the reversal of Section 28 and changes in public attitudes, eventually the introduction of gay marriage, I thought lesbians would finally be able to live free from prejudice and certainly without state interference. And for a few years that was more or less true. Homophobia persisted, of course, but we were able to organise lesbian discos, bookshops, nights out, walking groups. Naively, I thought that we had achieved an unchallengeable right to live publicly as lesbians. How wrong I was, says Sally. And she goes on to describe the challenges some lesbians now face defending our right to meet as lesbians without men who identify as women demanding access to our events. And Sally says, for some years now, lesbian groups have been forced to organise and meet in secret, taking care how we advertise our activities or invite new members. Almost all our social places and meetings are closed. And I can vouch for that. You won't find lesbian bars anymore in the United Kingdom, and I think that's a real shame. Sally goes on to say, women self-exclude from previously safe lesbian spaces and events which have de facto become mixed. And Sally goes on to describe how and why many lesbians feel unwelcome at Pride marches. Sally says lesbians who feel like her have been betrayed by the political class. She sees politicians as happy to watch, while lesbians who feel like Sally are erased from our culture, and young women who are gender non-conforming are encouraged only to think of themselves as trans, rather to acknowledge that they might also maybe just be lesbian. And Sally believes that some politicians are pandering to homophobia. Now, the experience of Sally and her friends is shared across the United Kingdom. Here's what a group of lesbians from Wales have said about it, and I quote, "Lesbians are facing enormous challenges defending our rights to meet as lesbians. We hear the stories regularly. Online groups being assailed by demands for access, if only to a book group. Dating apps filled with males seeking friends, maybe more. Young lesbians, including university students, unable to find safe spaces without men telling them to hate their love of women. Public events facing at best constant efforts to join in and at worst full-scale picketing and aggression. Lesbians have always faced challenges from men unable to accept our independent sexuality, but in the last 5 years we have seen such attacks ramp up every month. The number of assaults and the vitriol aimed at us has grown beyond many women's ability to manage. The organisers of such spaces sometimes give in to these demands. Maybe they are not too concerned about lesbian boundaries, or maybe they sincerely welcome male-bodied people into their organisations. That's not a problem, so long as everyone knows what to expect. But we hear too often from women saying that they don't believe they have any legal choice but to allow men into women's spaces, or they are scared of the doxing and abuse that frequently follow when women say no. And the group of lesbians from Wales say, "We are seeing lesbians forced into gathering in secret, meeting behind closed doors, or meeting behind passwords and using false names in social situations." Now, those are the words of lesbians from an organisation called LGBT Alliance Cymru, and they say that they refuse to go back into the closet and to return to hiding, and that they think those days are over for good. Now, like Sally, those Welsh lesbians believe that those lesbians who want mixed spaces are welcome to have them, but equally those who want to meet, socialise and interact only with other lesbians must be allowed to do so. And I recently met here in this house with a delegation of lesbians from Women's Declaration International who share these concerns and had come to lobby parliamentarians. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, despite vocal voices to the contrary, these concerns are widespread across the lesbian community in the United Kingdom. I don't say that all lesbians think the same, but I simply wish to give a voice to those who express these concerns. Now, I don't have time today to set out what the solution to these concerns is, but inevitably I see it as a lawyer as something that would involve the proper application of the right to single-sex spaces in the Equality Act and the recognition that sexual orientation is a protected characteristic and that lesbians should not be discriminated against, harassed or victimised on account of their sexuality and their same-sex attraction. The solution to these problems would also involve the recognition of the rights of lesbians under the Human Rights Act and the European Convention of Human Rights to safety, dignity, privacy, freedom of belief, freedom of expression and freedom of association. Now, earlier this week, the Women and Equalities Committee heard some interesting evidence around these legal rights issues from the barrister Naomi Cunningham, who is an expert in equality law, and the constitutional law academic Michael Foran, himself a gay man. And I commend it to those who are interested in learning more about the legalities around these issues. But my point today is to say that in LGBT History Month, we should be able to say that lesbians are women who love other women. That is our history, and we should be free to say it. So I'm saying it here in this Parliament that is supposed to represent the voices of everybody in the United Kingdom. Now, no doubt, because I've made this speech today, somebody will call me a transphobe and somebody will call me a bigot. In previous weeks, I might have expected to have been shouted down in this House, but I think after recent events, MPs have learned that shouting down their colleagues when they're talking about LGBT rights is not really, or women's rights, is not really a very good look. Some lesbians have faced losing their livelihoods for saying what I'm saying. They've faced threats of sexual violence and they've faced death threats for sticking up for their right to love other women. But they've stood up and fought, and they deserve a voice in this Parliament. And I'm thinking in particular of Kathleen Stock, Jo Phoenix, Julie Bindle, Shireen Benjamin, Alison Bailey, Rona Hotchkiss, Bev Jackson and Kate Harris. Those two last women set up an organisation to represent the interests of lesbians who are same-sex, not same-gender attracted. It's called LGB Alliance, and it's currently facing what I consider to be a malicious lawsuit akin to a slap to remove its charitable status. It's very important, Madam Deputy Speaker, that organisations like LGB Alliance should be allowed to organise on the basis of same-sex attraction. That's their legal right under the Equality Act and under human rights law. I believe LGB Alliance will prevail, and I believe lesbians will prevail. And in this month of lesbian history and in future months, we will stand up for who we are and for our rights with pride. Thank you.